Hey everyone, in today's video I'll be sharing with you one of Sambucha's best chess wins where he demonstrates basically a lot of high level understanding of the game. So hopefully by the end of this video you'll be able to take away a few lessons and use them in your games as well. So the opening starts out with knight f3 and it quickly goes into a king's Indian attack by white where he fianchettos shadows the light squared bishop on the king side and he plays d3 looking to play e4 in the future and break in the center that way. Meanwhile, Sambucha is building his nice pawn structure, a triangle on the light squares reminiscent of the Slav defense. So going forward, pretty normal development, and I said white plays knight bd2 and goes for e4, and here Sambucha plays e5. Now usually moving the same pawn twice in the opening is not recommended, but in this case it's deciding between whether you want to waste a tempo moving the pawn again or you want to continue developing and keep up with white's initiative, because white usually starts out so he maintains a tempo, and in this case white doesn't play the most testing opening. Like the king's Indian attack usually isn't known to be like as as like testing as normal e4 and other openings. So here black is a bit more free to do these kinds of stuff, and especially here pushing the pawn forward gains more central control and also opens up the light squared bishop. So this is a fine move, and usually this is the mindset you should have when you're trying to look for ways to break rules. Like in general, you're not supposed to move the same piece twice, same pawn twice, and I recommend keeping this mindset at the beginner level. But if you want to break a rule, usually you have to look and compare between two opportunities and choose between them, and in this case pushing the pawn again, it proves to be much better. And the game goes on. He develops his light squared bishop, he induces h3 and then goes back and then plays queen c8, so aligning a battery on to the h3 pawn. So if you look back, this was very well done by Sambucha. First he pushed the e pawn to open up his light squared bishop, and then he goes, induces a weakness of h3, comes back and then uses his battery to try and hit this weakness. Now this is something that you can use in your games. Basically try to induce some sort of weakness by pushing your knight or bishop forward, and once they move their pawns you can go back with your piece and their pawns cannot go back. So that's how you sort of adapt to this mindset of inducing weaknesses. And here white plays g4, and it's not all that bad in this specific position because white usually looks to play f4 and so on. So g4 does also kind of help him, so it's not like you induced a really big weakness. But in this case, again, this mindset and this skill set of trying to induce weaknesses was demonstrated by Sambucha, which was really nice. And then further he develops his bishop to e6, over defending on d5, and as you see in the game he later plays c5. Now this isn't the most accurate way, and the engine actually prefers white here because white can get in f4 and black isn't in time with his idea where black wants to play d4 and play c4 and break open the queen side that way. White here definitely has the initiative, and since it's towards the king side as well, it's much more dangerous here. He starts slowly kicking back black's pieces, and then he brings in his own pieces into play on the king side. And once black does get c4, white can simply continue with knight g3, and here as you can see he's basically slowly bringing all his pieces to make some sort of pawn break and opening on the king side. Meanwhile black really doesn't have much firepower on the queen side. He's still lacking in development there, as you see this rook on a8 and knight on b8. So that's why the c5 idea wasn't that great. However, in this position opponent had to play f4, which he didn't. In the game he responds with c3, and then black continues to develop everything so fine, and in fact he even gets a d4 with tempo, and after a trade everything's normal so far. The knight does jump to f5, and here Sambucha decides to trade. Now this is another inaccuracy by black, but white doesn't respond correctly. And in this position I actually want you to take a pause and tell me which pawn you take with. Now if you said you take with the g pawn, which is what happened in the game, it's actually an inaccuracy. At first it looks like perhaps you're opening up this file towards the black king and that could create some sort of attack, but there isn't really any way you could immediately bring in your rook, And even if you do, like your rook does stare at his pawn, the king can just sidestep. He has other pieces that can always come into attack. Like he's a black can always well defend if needed. On the other hand, if you took with the e-pawn, in this case, you would be continuing with moves like h4, g5. You'd kick this knight out, and you'd basically continue the pawn storm, and then you'd bring your pieces behind the pawns to cause a lot of damage. So here, e takes f5 is actually much better, and congratulations to you if you chose it, and if you didn't, well, nice, because now you learned something. So it's about choosing the option and then trying to evaluate the final position. And in this case, the pawn storm is much more better than the open foul for the rook. So going forward in this game, now black is all fine because white doesn't have any attack, honestly. And going forward, a bit of piece shuffling, and here white offers a trade of knights, trying to take away black's best defender on the king side. And if you don't know already, the king's best defender is usually the f6 knight, as he covers the h5 square, the g4 square, and the h7 square. Usually this h7 is a weakness, and this prevents the queen from coming in as well. So the knight on f6 does a really nice job of protecting the king. So here white decides to try and trade them off, and black goes with queen d8 and protects the knight this way instead of trading, letting white capture him. Now here knight bd7 would been the best choice, because he would be defending his knight with the other knight. So if the trade does happen, he still has his f6 knight defender, which restricts the queen from coming in easily. Now queen d8 isn't bad either, but okay, after the trade, now white gets in queen g4 as I just mentioned, so that's why the knight on f6 was key. But in this case, there really isn't any threat. Now Sambucha plays g6. He gets a bit worried. He tries to clarify some situation on the king side, but all he does is create dark squared weaknesses. And here, take another pause and find a way for white to sort of gain some initiative after g6 and continue pressing forward. Now if you said bishop g5, that is the correct answer, because as I mentioned, he pushed g6, he weakened his dark squares. So now the queen has to go back to, let's say, g7, and white simply continues with queen h4, further creating more threats of bishop h6, trying to win the exchange. And once the rook moves, now white gets in bishop f6, going the other direction. And once the queen moves out, a trade on g6 and then f4, basically opening up the foul for the rook. If black didn't take with the f pawn, he would get checkmated here, so that's one thing you have to be careful about. And then taking with f pawn, f4, now he's opening up the fouls for his rook, so it's starting to get very iffy for black already. And honestly, I could see white winning from here most times if the low rated player continues to make decent moves, as black would be under a lot of pressure. Now going back, this is why understanding the concept of f6 knight defender was key, and that's why I mentioned it. If you went back with the knight, all of this wouldn't have happened. But okay, in this position, opponent doesn't play bishop g5, he pushes h pawn, and that gives Sambucha enough time to push h5 himself and attack the queen, close up the position. And once the queen goes back, he starts bringing his other rook onto the queen side and try to create counterplay, as now white really doesn't have any immediate attack on the king side. White tries to play f4, and here he activates his rook this way. Another nice move by white, taking advantage of sort of the rook's awkward position on c5, pushing it to b4. The rook still it's important that the rook still maintains an eye on the e5 pawn, defending it. And here, after bishop d2, he plays knight a4, basically trying to sort of find ways to infiltrate into the queen side and create counterplay there. White on the other side wants to create play on the king side, so it's this kind of struggle between them, and eventually they do end up trading queens, so the attack fades away for white. And it's basically both sides trying to find ways to develop their pieces to active squares, trying to break through. And here Sambucha, using his rook placed on b5, finds a way to take advantage of that, pushes a5, and sort of breaks open on the queen side this way. And meanwhile, white past few moves has been trying to get the passed f pawn, and the dark squares are weak, as I mentioned before, but now another nice idea is that black uses the light squares to basically freeze anything on the king side. So here the dark squares are weak but can't be immediately taken advantage of. The only way white could try is to infiltrate from the queen side this way and pose problems, but he really doesn't do so. He's more fixated on his side of the board, and that's where things slowly start to go wrong, and eventually he crumbles under pressure. He tries to bring his light square bishop into play and just hangs it, and Sambucha here does a really nice job of converting. First he goes back with his dark square bishop all the way back, safeguarding his pieces. He's up a piece here, so all he has to do is just convert the position, make sure he doesn't hang anything. And in fact, he even goes back, he forks the king and rook, and he wins an exchange. So now he's just up a rook, and now he basically forces another rook trade. And in this position, we get to the picture of the thumbnail where he basically freezes all of white's pieces, and white can't do anything here. Like, he literally can't do anything. All he can do is move his bishop back and forth and try to perhaps bring his king the other way, somehow create problems. Like, if black just maintains this position and just continues to push his pawn with his dark squared bishop supporting it, white can't do anything. And in fact here, once the dark squared bishop moved, this pawn was hanging, so here could have just taken it immediately, and this basically guarantees him not losing because he wins the only passed pawn for white. But okay, here he goes this way and he tries to safeguard his pawn, and this is where he allows the bishop to come in, of course completely still winning but unnecessary. But he goes back, he makes sure the pawn can promote, and it's game over basically. And here he had checkmate, but okay, he just has to take the queen that promoted, and here white resigns. And honestly, a really great game by both players until white ended up blundering a piece. A few mistakes here and there that I showed on how they could have attacked better, tried to gain initiative. And I hope you took away a couple of lessons on this, basically trying to grab initiative, the f6 defender for the king, and so on. And that's it for today's video. See you next time.